A phone rings in Gaza. October 1996, a father holds it out to his son. 20 seconds of conversation, then the line goes dead, and so does he. 50 grams of explosive hidden inside a handset, 3 centimeters from a man's skull. Mossad spent 18 months finding him. The phone needed 20 seconds. His name was Yahya Sinwar. Hamas called him the engineer. Israel called him a problem solved. They were wrong about that word. Solved. Because 40 days later, a replacement was already moving through Gaza's back alleys, studying exactly how Ayyash had died. Not mourning him, studying him. And what that replacement built next would take Mossad 2 more years just to see coming. This is not a story about one bomb maker. This is a story about what happens when killing a man teaches the next one how not to die. Ayyash was 29, an engineering degree from Birzeit, no criminal record before 1992. Just a talent precise and rare for devices that never misfired. By 1994, those devices had torn through buses in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, and his name sat at the top of a growing Israeli file. The file had his methods. It had his signatures. It did not have his address. He never repeated a pattern. Never trusted a phone. Moved through couriers, through safe houses. Through a discipline that should have kept him alive for years. It didn't. Shin Bet found the one crack he never accounted for. Family. Not an informant inside Hamas. Not a wiretap. Not a satellite, not a tracked vehicle. A relationship. The one thing 18 months of surveillance couldn't fully map, because it wasn't operational. It was personal. A Palestinian informant close to Ayyash's father agreed to plant a phone, modified, rigged, harmless looking. It sat in that man's house for days before it was ever used. Nobody who touched it knew what it was. On January 5, 1996, the father handed it to his son with no idea what he was holding. Ayyash answered a call that was never meant to be answered. The explosion took less than a second. The 18 months that preceded it had taken almost as long as the war itself. Israel called it justice. Hamas called it a lesson. Only one of them was thinking 2 moves ahead. There's a detail from that operation that rarely makes it into the retelling. Shin Bet had 2 other delivery methods ready before the phone. Both were scrapped in the final planning stage. Not because they failed, but because they carried too much risk of missing and leaving Ayyash alive, aware, and impossible to reach a second time. The phone wasn't the first idea. It was the one idea that couldn't be survived if it worked. That detail matters because it tells you something about the standard being set. Not just kill the man, kill him so completely, so surgically, that there's no version of this story where he walks away and adapts personally. The adaptation Israel assumed would die with him. It didn't. It moved sideways into whoever was watching closest. Because somewhere in Gaza, a man named Adel Awadallah was already taking notes. Not metaphorically. He requested the full account of how Ayyash had been found, piece by piece, from anyone inside the movement who had access to it. He watched what killed Ayyash and discarded it. All of it. Immediately. No phones, not one, not ever, under any circumstance. No family couriers. No safe house his own brother could name if pressed hard enough by an interrogator with time to spare. He built layers around himself that hadn't existed in Gaza before. Faster than anyone expected a bomb maker to move on security instead of output. Mossad's file on him took 2 years, not 18 months. 2 years. Every death Mossad delivered came with a lesson attached, addressed directly to whoever came next in line. September 1998. Israeli commandos surround a house near Hebron. No remote trigger this time. Just a firefight, room to room, and when it ends, Awadallah is dead. So is his brother Imad, another senior operative killed in the same exchange. Victory again, or so the report said, but something had already shifted. Hamas had lost 2 master engineers in 3 years, and the organization drew a conclusion that would outlast every assassination that followed it. One man holding every secret is 1 bullet away from losing everything. So they stopped building engineers. They started building systems that didn't have a face to put on a wanted poster. No more single point of failure. No more chief bomb maker whose death could gut the program overnight. Multiple cells now, none fully aware of what the others held. Mossad had spent a decade hunting people. Now there was no person left standing still long enough to hunt. One officer, years later, described it as chasing smoke through a house you can't see the walls of. You find where it was. You never find where it's going. And the men inside that smoke were watching. Every strike Israel ran, every mistake a predecessor made before the coffin closed on him, someone was cataloging all of it. Early 2000s. A name starts appearing in Israeli files that doesn't fit the pattern at all. Not a bomb maker. Not someone who built devices with his hands. Something else. Something that should have worried them a great deal more than it initially did. 22 years. That's how long Yahya Sinwar spent inside an Israeli prison, before anyone outside intelligence circles knew his name meant anything at all. 22 years learning Hebrew fluently, not out of curiosity but as a tool. 22 years studying Israeli politics, Israeli media, the exact psychology of how interrogations worked, how informants got recruited, how they eventually broke and talked, and under exactly what pressure they broke. He wasn't building bombs in that cell. He was building a model of the very organization that had built the last 2 kills, running it in his head, year after year, testing it against every case study he could get his hands on. Former inmates who served alongside him described something specific in later interviews, something that stuck with more than one of them long after release. Sinwar would ask other prisoners in detail about how they were caught. Not for sympathy, for data. What did you say first? What did they already know before they asked? Where did the story fall apart? He was running informal debriefs inside a prison yard for free, on anyone willing to talk, and he remembered every answer. By the time he had a full picture, he wasn't studying one failed operative. He had a data set spanning dozens of them, assembled one conversation at a time, inside the one place Israeli intelligence assumed was fully under control. When he walked out in a 2011 prisoner exchange, he wasn't carrying blueprints for a bomb. He was carrying something Mossad had never trained against directly, a man who had spent 2 decades studying the hunters instead of studying the hunt. He knew phones were traps before he ever touched one as a free man. He knew patterns got people killed before he ever set foot outside that prison gate. He knew every convenience an operative allowed himself was a door somebody else could eventually walk through, given enough time and enough motivation. So he didn't build a bomb program. He built tunnels, hundreds of kilometers of them, invisible from above, useless to satellites, useless to signals intelligence. Networks with no single command point anyone could sever. Communication that never touched a signal anyone outside could trace back to a name. Inside Mossad, an argument was happening that almost nobody outside the building ever heard about. Some officers believed the strategy was working, that every death degraded what Hamas could still do. Others believed something harder to say out loud in a room full of people who'd built careers on the opposite conclusion. That the killings weren't eliminating a threat. They were training one. One officer said it anyway in 2009, in a closed session that surfaced years later through a redacted memoir manuscript. Every high-profile kill was functioning as a recruitment tool, not a deterrent. Young men were approaching the movement specifically because of who it had just lost. The room did not agree. The operations continued on schedule, and both sides were right, which never makes it into an after-action report. Ayasha's death taught the danger of trusting family. Awadallah's death taught the danger of centralizing knowledge. Each generation absorbed exactly what killed the last one. By the time Sinwar rose to lead Hamas inside Gaza, Israeli intelligence wasn't tracking a person anymore. It was studying something that had spent 3 decades adapting specifically, deliberately, methodically, to the exact methods designed from the start to destroy it. October 7, 2023. Whatever anyone in Tel Aviv believed about how contained this threat had become after 30 years of operations, that single morning erased it in a matter of hours. This wasn't one man building a bomb alone in a basement. This was coordination across dozens of cells, discipline structured around every gap 30 years of study had revealed. Sinwar didn't survive Israeli intelligence for over a decade by accident. He survived it by making it his curriculum, his entire education, the only subject that mattered inside that cell for 22 years. He was killed in October 2024, found in a tunnel by a patrol that didn't initially know who they'd found, confirmed by DNA analysis days later once the body reached a lab. Another name closes on a list that opened back in January 1996, almost 30 years earlier, with a phone and a father who never knew what he was carrying. But here's the part nobody wants to sit with, the part that doesn't fit neatly into a headline or a press briefing. The list isn't closed. It was never designed to close, not by Mossad's actions, and not by Hamas's structure either. Because somewhere inside Gaza right now, someone is doing exactly what Awadallah did in 1996, and exactly what Sinwar did in a prison cell for 22 years straight, studying the last death in detail, cataloging precisely what got him found, what signal he gave off, what pattern broke first, building the version of himself engineered specifically not to make that same mistake twice. The real question was never whether targeted killing works, tactically, in isolation. Almost every operation worked exactly as planned. The device detonated where it needed to. The building came down on schedule. The target died where intelligence said he'd be. The question nobody asks in the celebration afterward is what stands up in the wreckage once the dust clears. 3 decades. 4 names carried through this account alone, and dozens more the public record barely touches. Filed under designations that mean nothing to anyone outside a small compartment inside one building in Tel Aviv. And at the end of every single one of those names, there is no empty chair waiting to be filled by chance. There is someone already standing in the wreckage, reading the last death like a technical manual, extracting the one page that actually matters, and rewriting it before the funeral procession has even finished moving through the street.